Welcome to the Sacramentalists, a podcast where the ancient Christian faith is brought to bear on issues prevalent in modern culture. We're your hosts. I'm Father Creighton McElveen.
And I'm Father Wesley Walker.
Well, today we have an exciting conversation lined up for you. We have as our guest Father Paul Sterne, who is a priest in the Diocese of the Holy Cross in the ACC. He's also the chaplain at the C.S. Lewis Student Center at the University of South Carolina. And he is the author of some very fun, very charming children's stories and has a children's book available called the Liturgy Trilogy. Father Sterne, welcome to the Sacramentalists.
Hello. And just for your viewing audience, yes, I am wearing the Elvis wedding jacket, which I only wear for very special occasions. And for your listening audience, it's black on black paisley. And my goal one of these days is to have a Elvis wedding cassock custom made. So all your listeners should go out and buy lots and lots of copies of my book as soon as the podcast is over so I can get the Elvis wedding cassock.
Yes, for those who don't know, Father Paul is quite an Elvis Presley aficionado, which makes him awesome.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
So, Father, perhaps to start out, before we jump into the actual book itself, I think a lot of our listeners would be really interested in the work you do at the C.S. Lewis Center at University of South Carolina. Could you talk a little bit about what the center is and what sort of things you do through it?
Yes, I'll tell you the story of how we got started. We have a house about 4,000 square feet. It's built in 1907. It's right in the middle of campus. Everything else on the block is owned by the university. And it was owned by our late foundress, Professor Rosamond Sprague, who was a philosophy professor at the University of South Carolina. And she at first just lived on the second floor. She rented it. This was back in the 60s. She moved in. And she and her husband, who was a retired English professor, lived there. And one morning, she was downstairs having coffee with the wife of the couple that owned it. It was an art professor, Ed Yajin, and his wife, Dot. And all of a sudden, this question came out of her mouth. She said, "Dot, will you sell me this house?" And she thought, where did that come from? Why did I ask that question? And meanwhile, Dot didn't respond to her. She called to her husband, Ed, who was walking out the front door, and she said, Ed, come back. Rosamond's going to buy the house. And he was on his way out the door to sell the house to the university right at that moment. So it was some serious divine intervention, because then throughout the course of the years, as she, after she owned the house, the university tried to get her to sell out to them so they could build a big, ugly parking garage or something on this block. The rest of the block is older houses too, but they are all owned by the university. And she and her husband never had children, and they made the church their heir, basically. So she had it in her will that the house would go to the church. And in fact, when we read her will, it said specifically, do not sell it to the university. So she had always thought, well, after she passed away, the church would get it and we'd do something with it. But instead, she, in 2005, I was already back in Colombia. I was assisting at our church. I kind of had an unfortunate situation before and had to land back home. And I was sort of discerning, well, where am I going to go from here? And she called me up and she said, well, my downstairs tenant, who's been there 31 years, is moving out. Why don't you move in and we'll see if we can go ahead and get something started. And so first we started this little St. Theodore's Anglican chapel. And I had delusions of tons and tons of Anglican students beating down the door, and that didn't exactly happen. But we did, a whole lot of it was trial and error. We did find that C.S. Lewis was a great draw across denominational lines. And so then we added the whole C.S. Lewis aspect, C.S. Lewis Student Center. And so it became the ministry to the Brainiac nerds, which is not exactly what I intended, but that's what God provided. And it also really for me incarnated the whole charism of Anglicanism, because we have Roman Catholic and Orthodox and Baptist and Calvinist students who all come, and C.S. Lewis is a great example of someone who gets to the heart of the faith, but it's not in a watered down way. it's in a fully vigorous way. So one of our main activities is book club. That's on Thursday night, and it's all homework free. So you just show up. Right now we're reading Out of the Silent Planet, which is the first of Lewis's space trilogy. And one of the only other podcasts I listen to is called Pints with Jack. And several years ago, they went through Out of the Silent Planet. So that has been good for me to listen to their. Just before we started this, I was listening to one of their podcasts about what we're reading tonight. So that's my plug for Pints with Jack too. And so let's see, where was I? So I live here. Dr. Sprague passed away at the age of 100. She still lived on the second floor. She died 2 days after the Queen. And so then I moved up into her apartment. And so before, my commute was from my bedroom into the chapel, which were just right next to each other. Now I have to step all the way downstairs and all the way back up. But it's still a great commute. And it's been a great joy for me to work with the college students, and they definitely keep me young.
I should say that we have a slight connection in this way because before I came to Annapolis to serve in an APA parish, I was serving in a parish in Lynchburg, Virginia, and one of your former students from the C.S. Lewis house started attending my parish. So I was aware of you even before we joined the Continuum and even before we met. So I am very appreciative of your ministry, and he was a great guy and really fun to talk to. So yeah, that's awesome.
So and I just wanted to also say, I think the very first time, Father, that we met, you gave me a card for the C.S. Lewis Center, and it's the best sort of church and or business card I have ever seen, ever.
Is it that?
And there it is. It's
a wardrobe.
It's a wardrobe that opens up.
That is amazing.
And here's the big version. This is the big version. And it opens up. It's got pictures, and it's got this is kind of old, so that's pictures of Husband Sprague in there. And she was a great lady and a great mind. I wish you could have had her on the podcast because she knew everybody. She was a friend of Dorothy L. Sayers, especially. That was one of her main interests besides philosophy, and now she's interceding for us.
Yes. Maybe we could talk a little before we get into the specifics about your book, about the importance of children's literature and sort of what caused you to go in that direction. Because, I think a lot of people think, priests, we're sort of supposed to be these kind of deep theologians and motivators of our people, and so maybe we don't interface with the children as much, or maybe we delegate that work out to someone else in the parish. But here you've written what is a wonderful children's book. So what was kind of the heart behind that, and how do you see kind of your role as priest playing into that as well?
Well, I've always loved working with the children, and when I was young, I read the Chronicles of Narnia. It was probably my favorite series, even though I have to be honest, I didn't entirely get, Lewis wanted to write it as a good story, and he didn't necessarily want to cram the Christianity down your throat. And when my friends said, when you get done with it, you feel like worshiping Aslan, and I thought, that is totally kooky. I don't understand what he's talking about. And then I went back and read it when I was growing up, and I said, I finally understand what David meant by that about wanting to worship Aslan. So my book is a lot more cram it down your throat. I call it a didactic fiction. So I'm not as good as Lewis is about that, but there are little sections where Father Candlemas, who's the rector, will say, this is what this means, blah, 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 and he'll explain everything. But I had the idea for the Littlest Acolyte probably about around the year 2000, because I remember I was living in Washington, D.C. That's where my first church was, and I got some of the basic ideas for it, and then I just sat on it. Our mutual friend, Canon Robert Bader, because I told him this idea years ago, and so we would talk about it all the time. And he was so happy when I finally sat down and wrote it, which was probably, I think, was about 2018. And so I got him to be one of my first proofreaders, and he saved me from the egregious era of having Father Candlemas put the mantle on in the wrong order with the still. So I have to thank him for that. And so I always thought about it. And then finally, I just said, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this book. And my intention was just to write this first book, The Littlest Acolyte, that goes through serving at a Sunday Mass and has these characters. And then I have the second book was Can I Be God's Handmaiden Too? And that was for Junior Altar Guild. And then the third one is the Mysteries of the Mysteries, which just goes through the Mass. And all those are really kind of glorified instruction manuals. Okay, do you want me to segue now into the actual writing of the book? Okay. All right. You're on mute, though. Father West.
Yes, let's talk about it.
Okay, if we have to edit that out, I want a star wipe. Okay. So I finally sat down and I wrote it, and I thought, oh, nobody's going to want to read this book, so I'm just going to self-publish it myself. And so I only made 25 copies of this. So one of these days, these are going to be worth a lot of money when I become world famous and I have that Elvis wedding cassock. And one of the things I did is, I'm sure a lot of your people know these wonderful charts by the Parish Press. I had asked the Parish Press, which is run by Bishop Keith and Joanne Ackerman, they're wonderful people. I asked, could I use some of their charts in there? And they said, oh, sure. And then when I got it printed, I sent them a copy and I said, well, they might want to see it. And they said, oh, we love this. We want to publish it, which I was not expecting. But by that time, I had already started to write the second book, which goes through the Advent and Christmas cycle. And I think I might have even started working on the third book. And I told them, that's wonderful, but my plan, because it's going to be a trilogy, is to have a box set when I get them all done. And they said, well, that's kind of beyond our capability, but we could publish them all in one binding. So that's how we came up with this, which it says right here, 3 books in one binding. I wanted to call it 3 books in one substance, but I thought that might be borderline blasphemous. And they are didactic fictions, but it becomes more and more fiction as you go along, and less didacticism, is that right? Less teaching, less of a glorified instruction manual. And so I have lots of drawings, as the English say, and the first one, like that's the lighting and extinguishing. And here's my public service announcement. If you have the first printing of the book, 2 and 4 are mislabeled in the extinguishing. So you either have permission to go and fix it with your pen, or if you want to retire by selling off an untouched first printing of it, you can just leave it like that. That will be how scholars 200 years from now hold sell, whether it's the first printing or not. And
we call that Deutero. We call that Deutero Paul.
Yes. And then so one of my alumna did the pictures, and so that helps a whole lot. This is warning you not to twist the bread box by the cross right there. Thou shalt not, and how you set up the credence table. So there are lots of drawings in the first book. So every book has a long, complicated title. The first one is Solemnly Serving Our Savior at St. Swithin's, commonly called the Littlest Acolyte. And the second one, which goes through the Advent and Christmas cycle, is the Almost Littlest Acolytes, Almost Littlest Advent, following which Timmy says Christmas. And so there's a spoiler. And the third book, which goes through the Paschal cycle, is, some of these titles don't make sense unless you read it. From Tide to Tide with Timmy, otherwise known as the Littlest Acolyte, the Littlest Acolyte, and the Widowest Acolyte, concomitant with Up in Smoke, the Mystery of the Vanishing Incense, which I will talk in a little bit. So then I knew I had to come up with a big, long, complicated title for the whole book. So it's The Littlest Acolyte Presents the Liturgy Trilogy, or Wending the Way from Week to Week in Worship and Wonder with the Walsinghams of Winchester New. So it's about the family called the Walsinghams. The youngest boy is Timmy. He's the Littlest Acolyte. And then the next sister up is Maggie, and she learns how to be on the Junior Altar Guild. And then they have a middle child named Regina, who is really mean and manipulative. And those are actually the most fun characters to write for, are the ones that are like really snarky and they're not really happy, or they're not fun characters. They're fun characters to write, but they're the main characters. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, I listened to the podcast with Letters to a Future Saint. And Father Wes, you made this comment about the authors love their characters. And I was driving along saying, yes, 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 yes. That's so true. And the whole experience has given me, I haven't turned Calvinistic yet, but it's given me a better understanding of the providence of God, in terms of that these are characters that I create, and they don't always do what I want them to do, but they need to do this in order for the whole story to work out. And a part of my own devotional life, every morning I do this daily examen, which is based on St. Ignatius of Loyola. And one of the first things is to contemplate the love that God has for you. And so a lot of times I think of some of the characters. There's especially one character, Magnolia Blossom. She's my favorite character in the whole series. And she's the femme fatale of the story. And I'll think about how I have a great love and concern, and I want everything to work out right for her and for all the other different characters. And I also had a thought about Regina I was going to share, because my favorite one of y'all's podcasts was when you had Father Matt Harlow, and he had the possessed ciborium. And I told him, oh, I'm going to have to write a book now, The Littlest Exorcist, and Timmy has to help Father Candlemas. And I was thinking, well, maybe it should be that Regina, they're not sure whether or not she's possessed by a demon or not, but Timmy will help Father Candlemas exorcise Regina. And then next up is Susanna. She's about 15, and then they have a son, Patrick, who's 18, and he's going to college at a place called Gloam, and that's a really obscure C.S. Lewis reference, because Gloam, if you ever read Till We Have Faces, that's the land, the country. So I have all these, I worked in all these obscure, especially pop culture references. I love the Brady Bunch, so if you know the Brady Bunch, there are a lot of little secret Brady Bunch references in there. So anyway, so I wrote the first book, and then I thought, oh, that was going to be it. And one of my students said, oh, you need to write a book about Advent now, because everybody has Christmas. Nobody has any Advent. And I thought, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to write any more books. And then that thought stuck with me, and I started to develop it. So that book goes through the 4 Sundays of Advent and correlates to the themes death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And actually, the scene starts out with, and this is going to come back in one of the passages that I read, one of the torchbearers falls out right in the middle of the gospel procession, and that was based on a real event. And I saw that happen, and I was like, that's the beginning of my Advent story, as he falls out. And so then, and I also, along with this thought, it's kind of parallel with the Littlest Acolyte thing, I wanted to write some mysteries with a character named Father Chance. And so the third book has Up in Smoke, the Mystery of the Vanishing Incense. And the incense is disappearing in the church. It starts in pre-Lent and goes through Whit Sunday. And so there's this mystery. You've got to find out who is snagging the incense, who's the incense thief. And that he has sort of a sidekick named Miss Lavinia. She's a professor. And a lot of the characters, some of the characters are 110% based on real people. And Miss Lavinia is about 30 to 40% based on Rosamund Sprague. She's not exactly one-to-one. And so she sort of helps him solve the mystery. And she's one of my favorite characters. She's a good character, but I have a great love for her. And I'm already starting to work on the next book, which is going to be the Father Chance Mysteries. And it's going to be 7 short stories. And they're all going to be related to the 7 virtues. And 1, 3, 5, and 7 are going to be the cardinal virtues. And those are more kind of whodunits. And I thought, oh, your Father Chance, there would be all these murders in the church, and every time you turn around, someone was getting killed at St. Swithin's. But another one of my students said, oh, you ought to write a whole bunch of little churchy mysteries, like the Up in Smoke with the people, somebody stealing the incense. And so that's what those are going to be. For instance, there's one where there are 2 competing ways that you fold the palm cross for Palm Sunday, because Father Chance introduces a simpler way that the children and all the women in the church get all upset. So there's this one part where you see the basket of Father Chance's palm crosses, and then you see this hand come out from behind a curtain, and it drags the basket back, and then it replaces the basket with the old style of palm cross. So then he's got to figure out who the palm cross palmer is. And I've been working on that a couple years. I found that during the first year that I worked on it, I just worked on it over the summer. When school is in session, it's like from the moment I get up to the moment I retire that I want to. So I had one whole year where I wrote over the summer, and I got like 2 incomplete stories done, and I didn't really write much over the year. And so this year I have a policy of at least 1 day a week doing some writing. So I'm hoping to get that finished by the end of this coming summer, I hope. Famous last words. And I know there's no deadline. It's whenever I get it done. And so this has a lot more story. And so, okay, so anyway, so 2, 4, and 6 are going to be the theological virtues. And those actually get kind of dark. And I'm going to have a disclaimer that if you're under 12, you shouldn't read those chapters yet, even though people tell me, oh, then that's going to guarantee that children under 12 are going to go right to it. But when you upset parents come to me and say, I can't believe you put this in a children's book, I can say, well, I had that disclaimer right there, so they were not supposed to read those chapters. And see, where am I so far? I made a couple of notes. Yeah, I don't know. What do you want to know now?
Well, I think one of the things that I appreciate about the Littlest Acolyte Liturgy Trilogy is that it's I think a really creative way to convey, like you said, it's didactic, convey some really practical things about serving at the altar or helping out with altar guild, all those sorts of things. And I was curious if you know of any sort of direct application, like the ways in which this book specifically has maybe helped or encouraged priests talk to kids about serving at the altar, getting more servers, getting more altar guild helpers, things like that, because I think it is a really great tool to make it less sort of stuffy or intimidating. And I think that's a great thing.
Well, I have had priests tell me that they use it. I think one priest who ordered lots and lots of copies, which I recommend to everyone, again, just listening to it, to order lots and lots of copies. And he uses it with his children, the children in the church, as a training manual. And that's why I wanted to have lots of illustrations. When I first sort of got it done, I went back and read through it, and I realized, I did not have nearly enough illustrations, because so much of it is, you put the wine here, you put the water here, and I can write all that stuff out, but if the children don't see it, it makes it harder for them to memorize that. And I have sold books to just people that I know who aren't Anglicans, that I know aren't going to be interested in a lot of, you put the wine here, the water there. So I've given them all permission just to skim through all that and just get on to the second book, where you actually get more story.
I'll tell you a story kind of about the use of this book. So I have a couple copies now, because every time I buy you, I feel like you sell me a new one, which I'm not complaining about. And so all right, I've got a couple personal copies that I keep at our house, but I've also got a couple copies I keep at the church. And the last time we were together, which I think was October, I bought another copy of your book because we had a new family that had started coming to the parish, and they have a third grade, fourth grade son. And the father, who was from Ghana, had been raised as an altar server in his very Anglo-Catholic parish. And so he wanted to serve on the altar very quickly. And so we wanted to include him, and we wanted to include the son as well. And so I bought him his own copy of the Trilogy and gave it to him. And he loves it. And he wrote me a thank you note in which he included the Lord's Prayer in Latin, because he also goes to the classical Christian school where my son goes and takes Latin and knows that I'm a Latin teacher because I sub there. And so anyways, I thought the whole cycle of that was very rewarding, and I'm very appreciative for the book, because I think it's a helpful way to communicate those things without, us priests having to maybe sit them down and lecture them or whatever. It at least supplements what we do in terms of teaching them how to serve on the altar. So thank you. I really, really am appreciative of this, and I'm very excited about the future entries. When you do write the next one, we should have you back, I think.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that about your family from Ghana, because I have a whole bunch of made-up fake countries scattered throughout the book, and one of them is called the Cocoa Coast, and it's basically Ghana. And the name of the deacon, which is Tisinyi Akoa, I got from two Ghanaian words, which mean servant and a witness. So he's named after the first Saint Stephen, the first deacon and martyr.
Oh, that's cool. Excellent, excellent. Well, Father, if somebody wanted to order a copy of the book, where would they do that?
The easiest thing is to go to theparishpress.com. You got to include theparishpress.com. That's is the parish press, obviously run by Bishop and Mrs. Ackerman, and they are wonderful people. And besides ordering lots of copies of my book, you should order lots of copies of all the books on their website. And they are very generous, and really all the money goes back into the press and to just keeping it alive. It's a great bargain. The book is only $15 for 3 books in one. That's only $5 a book.
Excellent, excellent. Father Creighton, do you have anything else that we should talk about?
Well, I think everybody. I know Father Paul has already pitched his book very well, but I do think that it really is a great addition. Yes. For parish libraries, especially. I know that's something that I'd like to get off the ground at St. Hilda's. I'm kind of trying to work out a way to do this, to kind of start a parish bookstore, where we've got some books, resources, devotional aids, prayer books, things like that for sale in the parish. And we will definitely, when that comes to fruition, we will definitely order a good number of the Littlest Acolyte to grace our shelves, because I do think it's one of those rare tools that we can use that, just provides an extra layer of participation for kids. Because one of the things that I'm very passionate about is the idea that kids participate in the liturgy, kids participate in the worship of the church, that, they're not separated from the body. They learn by doing, they learn by experiencing, they learn by seeing their parents and friends and relatives praying and worshiping. And I think this is a great tool in a very fun, kind of lighthearted way, to help supplement that and add some excitement for kids to begin that process of, saying, well, how can I serve? How can I be involved and participate in the life of the parish? So I think it's a great resource for parents and parishes alike, if your kids are interested, or just a way to learn more about what's going on in the liturgy.
So that means our listeners have 2 very important assignments. The first is that if you have children, or if you are related to any children of any kind, you need to go buy at least 1 copy of the book for them. And then if you attend a church at all, you should go buy another copy for your church library so that it can be passed around with the folks there. Also, I'll just say too, one other thing I really appreciate about the book, Father, is the cleverness of it, and the fact that you do sort of layer it with images, illusions, some humor that, you know, maybe like my son is 6. We first read the book when he was 4. I think I sent you the picture of him holding it when he first got it. He was so excited. You know, there was much, I think, on the first read he couldn't fully get, but that he will as he revisits it in the future. And there's something to be said about children's literature in general, which is that there's been a sort of dumbing down of it, and that you pick up the average, like you go to the average, you know, used Christian bookstore or Christian bookstore, and most of the children's books are really, really, I think, just awful, not only from a substance perspective, but from a literary perspective. And I think that your book does a really good job of not only kind of upping the bar in terms of literary quality, but it's also just a perfect encapsulation of Anglo-Catholicism. It's sort of the tone of it. It's a really great way to sort of immerse a child into that. So for that, I am greatly appreciative.
Well, speaking of that, I have a couple of passages that I picked. Do you want me to read them?
Please, let's do it. Let's do it.
And your readers are going to get the sense. I have this one character named Cal Kirk, short for Calvin, and he is the resident Calvinist. He's, I guess, about 13 or so, and he is somebody who is 110% based on a real person, a young man who I love very dearly, and comes to St. Michael's Youth Conference. So he suffers all of our Anglo-Catholic eccentricities. And so, but he's not a major character in the book, but he's somebody that's really fun to write for. And so this happens on this part is after Father Chance has arrived, and it's very confusing. I listened to a video about how to write recently, and it said, don't give your characters really similar names. But all the 3 priests in here are Father Candlemas and Father Chance and Father Chaplain. So they're all Father C, and those were all just kind of revealed to me. A lot of the times of things are revealed to me. So sorry about that if it's confusing to the reader. If I go back, I might possibly change some names. But anyway, that's who they are. And so you're going to meet Father Chance, and he has just arrived at St. Swithin's. And so he arrived right after Christmas. And then, so this happens on St. Epiphany. And yeah, the other thing I was thinking about, there's a little reference to one of the boys, their set of twins, and the one that fell out during the gospel. I've already told you about that. St. Swithin's always had a big 12th night party on Epiphany to commemorate the end of the Christmas season and the beginning of Epiphany. That particular Epiphany, it was preceded by Solemn Evensong, during which Patrick and Timmy served as thurifer and boat boy. Their big moment in Evensong came during the Magnificat, the canticle of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Father Chancel had explained that the altar is sensed during the Magnificat because it is a hymn of the Incarnation, and thus we sense that by which we now encounter the incarnate Christ. Patrick had to explain to his little brother that the priest was referring to Holy Communion. After Father Chancel sensed the altar, he returned the thurible to Patrick, who then sensed the clergy, choir, and congregation, just as he would at Mass. The big moment for the Thomas twins, who were serving as torchbearers, was during the Lord's Prayer, suffrages, and chanted collects, throughout which they stood on either side of Father Chancel to provide symbolic illumination as he interceded for God's people. Mercifully, Red made it through without incident, unlike the last time he had served as torchbearer way back at the beginning of Advent. Immediately following Evensong, yeah, your Anglo-Catholic listeners are going to love this part, because I mostly stick to the prayer book, but then I work in some of the Anglo-Catholic things as well. Immediately following Evensong, though technically a separate service, was benediction of the Blessed Sacrament, during which the consecrated host was taken out of the tabernacle and placed in a fancy cross-shaped holder called a monstrance. Red and Jake, those are the 2 twins, lit an extra pair of candelabra that had been added to the altar for this rite, lighting them just as they would the regular altar candles, from inner to outer. Father Chance set the loaded monstrance upon the altar between the two candelabra. He descended the steps and knelt at the bottom, where Patrick brought the thurible to his side, and Timmy opened up the boat for him to spoon on some incense while the hymn O Saving Victim was being sung. Father Chance then sensed the Blessed Sacrament himself and left a space for people to pray silently before the monstrance. Another sensing by Father Chance followed during the singing of Therefore We Before Him Bending, after which he chanted a prayer about this wonderful sacrament. Then he reascended the altar steps and carefully took the monstrance in both hands and slowly turned around with it, making a dramatic sign of the cross over the whole congregation. This was the big moment for all in benediction. While Patrick sensed and rang the Sanctus bells thrice, just as during the elevations. The big moment for all except Cal Kirk. When Father Chance placed the monstrance upon the altar, Cal muttered, "Monstrous," and excused himself to use the facilities. Before the service, Father Candlemas, who is the elder priest, had foreseen Cal's possible discomfort and had assured him that benediction was simply, quote, 2 hymns, a prayer, and a blessing, which that was the explanation of Father Hope Patton to the Bishop of Norwich, which is mentioned in Merrily on High, that it's just 2 hymns, a prayer, and a blessing. But obviously this strategy hadn't worked. And so at the beginning of the 12th night party in Hall, the parish hall is called Hall after a couple who are named Hall, Cal challenged Father Candlemas as to what the purpose of benediction was. Providentially, Cal's mother was standing right by and corrected her son. If you hadn't stomped out, you would have seen how beautiful it was. I know for myself, having that time to meditate upon the presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament. After all, he said, this is my body, not this symbolizes my body, is going to make me appreciate that presence all the more the next time I receive him. And remember what I was telling you just the other day? You are not the appointed theology police, the self-appointed theology police for the rest of the church. So those are kind of how some of the stories go and how I weave in the instruction with the narration. And I have one other passage that has to do with Cal. This is in the 3rd book that goes into Lent and Easter. Every Friday in Lent, St. Swithins always offered the Stations of the Cross, in which the faithful retrace the steps of Christ as he carried the cross on his way through the streets of Jerusalem to Mount Calvary, where he would offer himself for the sins of the whole world. Father Candlemas explained to Maggie, that's Timmy's sister, that the earliest name for Christianity was simply the Way. So when they were observing the Stations, which is also called the Way of the Cross, they were wending the way. That's the title that talks about wending the way from week to week. We're wending the way, walking along with Jesus as he showed us how to follow his way. The Friday after Lent 1, Cal Kirk was the crucifer, carrying the cross from station to station as the congregation sang the verses of the Stabat Mater, which chronicled the Blessed Virgin's heartbreak as she witnessed the agonizing sight of her son's passion. Cal stood motionless before each station during the meditation the priest would read for each one, his dour expression adding to the solemnity of the moment. Afterwards, Maggie mentioned that her favorite station was the 6th one, where Veronica wiped the face of Christ with her veil, which was miraculously imprinted with his image upon it. To which Cal made an even dourer face and dismissively replied, "It's not in the Bible." But Father Candlemas explained that the testimony of the stations is as old as the New Testament, for they go all the way back to those standing along the way as Jesus walked by. And if none of the 4 evangelists chose to include one particular story in his version of the gospel, it just meant he already had enough as it was, not that that particular event never happened. St. John even says at the end of his gospel that if everything Jesus ever did were written down, the whole world could not contain all the books you would need to do so. And every time I do the stations, when I get to that station, I always think of Cal Kirk. It's not in the Bible.
That is lovely. It really is such a great book. I am excited for future installments for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm especially excited for the mystery series.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there you're really blending a lot of genres that I think we would appreciate with mystery and with sort of that great English tone. It's fantastic.
And I won't give you any spoilers, but you will find out what happens with Father Chance and Magnolia Blossom. I'll give you that little teaser.
Love it. The only thing I think I would ask is maybe in the future, can you give some of the priests a podcast?
Oh, yes. Well, one of the things, speaking of technology, is Magnolia is going to try to convince Father Candlemas that St. Swithin's needs to be on Fritter. That's going to be the social media thing. And he's dismissive of Fritter. He doesn't think you need to fritter your time away on the Fritter.
Yes, as any good priest should. Yeah.
Yeah, he has a point.
Excellent. Well, Father, should we do what we're into? I know you've come prepared.
Yes. Well, when I was thinking of this, I thought, I need to find some obscure medieval theologian to read for fun, just like Father West. He's always saying, I'm reading Hugh of St. Victor for fun. But I'm not that holy. So I will share what I'm really into. The year before I went to seminary, there was a show on that I enjoyed and I watched, and then I went to seminary and I never finished it. It was called Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. So I've been going back and watching those, and they're really fun and enjoyable. And I've been also, I guess maybe I'm getting ready for the new Superman movie. I wouldn't say I'm an enormous Superman fan, but I appreciate him, and I think he's fun. And so I've also been watching the old Superman movies with Christopher Reeve, and I had already seen the first two, which are great. And the other day I watched number 3, which is terrible, and I know number 4 is terrible. And I also like to listen to the commentaries. So on number 3, the producer, the whole time he's trying to convince you that all this Richard Pryor stuff really is actually funny, even though it's really terrible and embarrassing. And so now I'm going to preach some really, really bad analogy sermons about how, he's both Superman and Clark Kent. Spoiler alert. Just like, Jesus is both God and man, and his father sent him from another world into our world. And another bad analogy I could make, even though this is not true on Lois and Clark, because in Lois and Clark, his parents are still alive, and those are some of my favorite parts of that show. But in canonical Superman, his foster father has already died before he enters into his public ministry, as it were. So if you want really bad sermon analogies, I'm going to start preaching those in order to relate to the young people.
Now we have to be careful, though, because Clark Kent, to become Superman, has to take off the shirt.
Yeah,
so
okay,
there,
right.
we run into some Nestorianism, perhaps. But no, I love it. That's fantastic. Father Creighton, what are you into these days?
I'm going to be very on the nose and plug The Littlest Acolyte, the Liturgy Trilogy. I think we've already covered all of that, but I do think it's great, and I think everybody should go buy copies. And I'm excited to, little baby Graham is a little too young at this point for serving at the altar and whatnot, but we're, time moves very quickly, so we're fast approaching. So I'm excited to one day be able to kind of work through all of that with him. If he is interested in serving, I think that would be a lovely way to go about it. And something sort of related to the Littlest Acolyte liturgy trilogy is recently, we've already mentioned his name, taken his name in vain, but Father Bader very kindly gave me a lovely Christmas present, and it sort of goes with some of the other bits. I like to collect things like prayer books and office books and whatnot. And since the church's name is St. Swithin's, I have a couple of copies of the St. Swithin's prayer book, which we've mentioned on the podcast before. Devotional prayer books, sort of like the St. Augustine's or St. Greg's or any of those. additional sort of offices and prayers and litanies and things for the faithful. But what Father Bader was able to find was the rarer than hen's teeth St. Swithin's and English hymnal combo. And it's quite a lovely little book that I'm very excited to have. Common in many Anglo-Catholic parishes in England to have the St. Swithin's and hymnal combo in the pew. And so very excited, very happy to have that. And I've been using it lately. It's a little fragile, so I have to be careful with it, but very, very into that. It's a great little piece of history.
Tell me a little bit more about the St. Swithin's prayer book, because I'm actually a really bad Anglo-Catholic. So some of these things I'm ignorant of. And actually, Father Jordan Gaddings and I are going to give you all a run for your money, because we decided we're going to start a podcast called The Bad Anglo-Catholic.
Well, the St. Swithin's is it's a great prayer book. So sort of like the St. Augustine's prayer book, it has multiple sort of devotional options. So it's got a holy hour, it has litanies, it goes through the Mass, and it provides sort of private prayers and devotions for the laity at different points in the Mass. So it'll have a prayer that you pray at the elevation, it'll have a prayer that you pray during the Agnus Dei. Like, it's sort of things that go around the liturgy itself that kind of add to your devotional experience. But then it also has, some pretty classic things like examination of conscience and a rite for confession and things like that all mixed in. It's kind of a one-stop shop for Catholic devotion. And then the edition that Father Bader very kindly found for me also has the entire English hymnal, which I think is a great hymnal. And so it's kind of a double whammy. So the idea is like that's the book you need if you're in the pew.
So all your listeners should buy multiple copies of it, you're saying?
Well, I'd love for our listeners to buy multiple copies of it. The sad thing is, it's not currently in print anymore. I'd love to be able to figure out a way to maybe get it back into print in a very nice edition. But it's not in print. So finding it, you're gonna have to do some investigation down the eBay rabbit hole or used bookstores and things like that.
Maybe we could do a St. Swithin's prayer book and Littlest Acolyte combo.
There we go.
Oh yeah.
Multiple ribbons in it.
Yeah.
Ribbons in the Littlest Acolyte.
I love it.
So Father West, what are you into?
Okay, well, mine is actually kind of similar to yours, Father, in terms of older movies. Well, older, I guess it doesn't feel that old, but I recently, I never read it, but I went back and read Jurassic Park, and then I watched the movie, and just was reminded at how wonderful the movie is. It really is fantastic. The book, I actually really enjoyed the book, and I enjoyed kind of how in the ways it was different from the movie. And so yeah, I thought it was really good. His writing style maybe wasn't the best, but he did. I think the story itself is really fascinating, and I guess the book is slightly more preachy in a way, but not in a bad way. Just certainly lays out sort of the dangers of hubris when it comes to science and all that. And so yeah, I really appreciated it. Thought it was great. And I like dinosaurs, so it was fun.
Well, I know it gets on some of the list of where the movie is actually better than the book. I've seen it. I've never read the book, but I've seen it on those kind of lists.
Yes.
And those movies are very few.
And the soundtrack is like playing in my mind perpetually now. Every time I wake up, I'm thinking of the Jurassic Park theme song. So
now are we being joined by Spider-Man? Right.
That's right. Yes, we got Spider-Man here. For those of you who are listening, my son has decided to interrupt the podcast so that I can zip up his Spider-Man costume outfit.
So that's what he's into, is Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, always into Spider-Man for sure.
Your friendly neighborhood.
That's right.
I do like Spider-Man. I'm a Spider-Man fan myself. I never really got into Superman. He never really had. It was never something that sparked that sort of hero interest for me.
I think maybe this is kind of some residual Protestant element in me, because I'm like, oh, I just want to go straight to the top and not worry with all these other. It just goes straight to God. So I just go straight to Superman.
He is sort of unfair in how powerful he is compared to everyone else. So that is fair.
But I also have a devotion to Wonder Woman too. So I guess she's like the BBM of the superhero world.
Oh, I always thought that Batman was kind of cool in the Justice League kind of world. I thought,
he's maybe like the St. John the Baptist. You think?
Yeah, maybe, but he's the greatest detective. So I liked the greatest detective aspect of things.
Yeah, he's the greatest of the old covenant before.
Yeah, exactly. Well, listeners, we really appreciate you guys today. This was a great conversation. Just to reiterate, if you're interested in buying Father Stern's book, you can do so at the Parish Press. We encourage our listeners to do that. If you would like, follow us on Facebook or Twitter. You can like or subscribe on YouTube and leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It definitely helps. And if you're interested, you can join our Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can become a member of the Communion of Patreon Saints. We're going to close with a prayer. Father Wes?
The Lord be with you.
And with thy spirit.
Let us pray. Almighty God, Heavenly Father, who has blessed us with the joy and care of children, give us light and strength so to train them, that they may love whatsoever things are true and pure and lovely and of good report, following the example of their Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Now, Father,